She was pregnant with the millionaire who abandoned her, but he came back for her sister's wedding, and the reunion was inevitable. The shrill sound of the cell phone cut through the silence of the room. Abigail Mason reached out a trembling hand to pick it up, her heart racing as she saw the name of her younger sister, Sophia, flashing on the screen. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Liv, you won't believe it!" Sophia's excited voice echoed through the handset. "He said yes. We're getting married." Abigail forced a smile, even though she knew her sister couldn't see her. "That's wonderful, Soph. I'm so happy for you." The words came out mechanical, rehearsed. As Sophia chattered on about wedding dresses and flowers, Abigail let the phone slip away from her ear. Her gaze wandered to the positive pregnancy test on the dresser, a sight that still made her dizzy. 2 weeks. It had only been 2 weeks since she had found out she was pregnant by Alexander Hawthorne, the man who had abandoned her without explanation 3 months ago. The same Alexander who was now her sister's brother-in-law. "Liv, are you still there?" Sophia's voice brought her back to reality. "Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just a bit tired." Abigail struggled to keep her voice steady. "When's the big day?" "In 6 weeks. I know it's short notice, Gan, but we want something intimate. Just for family and close friends. You'll help me with everything, won't you?" 6 weeks. Abigail did the math mentally. She would be almost 4 months pregnant at the time of the wedding. Would she be able to hide it for that long? "Of course, Soph. I'll be there for whatever you need." The words came out automatically, as her mind spun in a whirlwind of thoughts. After hanging up, Abigail dropped onto the bed, her hands instinctively resting on her still flat belly. How could she face Alexander again? How could she keep this secret from her family, especially Sophia? Abigail closed her eyes, remembering the last time she had seen Alexander. It had been a magical evening in Chicago, where she worked as an editor for a renowned fashion magazine. Alexander, a millionaire investor visiting the city, had invited her to dinner after a chance encounter in a cafe. What was supposed to be just one night turned into 3 months of intense passion, until, as without warning, he disappeared. Unanswered messages, calls that went straight to voicemail. It was as if Alexander Hawthorne had simply ceased to exist. Now he was back in her life in the most unexpected way possible. The sound of a notification snapped her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her mother. "Darling, come home as soon as you can. We have a wedding to plan." Quincy, Massachusetts, her hometown, a quiet suburb of Boston, seemed a world away from the hustle and bustle of Chicago. But that was where Abigail would have to return, facing not only her family, but also the man who had broken her heart, and the father of her child. Abigail stood up, determined. She had difficult decisions to make and little time to make them. As she packed a suitcase, her mind raced through all the possibilities. Tell the truth. Keep the secret. Confront Alexander. One thing was certain. The next few days would change her life forever. As she closed her suitcase, Abigail looked out of her apartment window. The Chicago skyline, with its towering skyscrapers, seemed to mock her shattered dreams. But there was something else there, a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this journey home would be the start of something new, something she couldn't yet imagine. With a deep sigh, Abigail picked up the phone and booked a ticket to Boston. It was time to face her past and, perhaps, redefine her future. As she closed the door to her apartment, a sense of finality enveloped her. Chicago had been her refuge, her escape. Now she was about to plunge back into the epicenter of her history, carrying a secret that could shake the foundations of her family. The cab was waiting for her at the curb. As she got in, Abigail took one last look at the building she had called home for the past few years. "To the airport, please," she said to the driver, her voice firmer than she felt inside. As the car snaked through the busy streets, Abigail let her mind wander. She thought of Sophia, so young and full of hope for the future. She thought of her parents, who had always dreamed of seeing their 2 daughters happy and fulfilled. And she thought of Alexander, the man who had turned her world upside down and who was now, without knowing it, about to do it again. The airport appeared on the horizon, a concrete reminder of the journey she was about to embark on. Abigail took a deep breath, gently stroking her belly. "We'll make it," she whispered, both to herself and to the new life growing inside her. "Somehow, we'll find a way through it all." With this silent promise, Abigail prepared to embark on a journey that promised much more than just returning home. It was a journey towards her destiny, whatever that might be. Upon landing at Boston's Logan International Airport, Abigail was immediately enveloped by the humid air characteristic of the East Coast. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, feeling the weight of the responsibility she was carrying. The terminal was bustling, full of hurried travelers and families reuniting. For a moment, Abigail envied the carefree joy on the faces around her. "Liv! This way!" Sophia's familiar voice cut through the hubbub of the airport. Abigail turned to see her younger sister waving frantically, a radiant smile lighting up her face. Next to her, with an arm casually slung over her shoulder, was him, Alexander Hawthorne. Time seemed to freeze. Abigail felt her heart racing, a mixture of conflicting emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Alexander was even more handsome than she remembered, his dark hair carefully messed up, his piercing blue eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Surprise? Guilt? Or was it just her imagination? "Hi, guys," Abigail managed to say, forcing a smile as she approached. Sophia immediately wrapped her in a tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to start the wedding preparations," Sophia exclaimed, her enthusiasm contagious. Abigail returned the hug, trying to ignore Alexander's closeness. When they finally separated, she couldn't help it any longer. Her eyes met his. "Abigail," Alexander said, his deep voice sending shivers down her spine, "it's good to see you again." There was a formality in his tone that took her by surprise. It was as if the passionate months they had spent together had never existed. Abigail swallowed, struggling to keep her composure. "Likewise, Alexander," she replied, proud of how firm her voice sounded. "Congratulations on your engagement." A flash of something, remorse, confusion, flashed through Alexander's eyes, but disappeared so quickly that Abigail wondered if she hadn't imagined it. "Thank you," he said simply, his arm lightly squeezing Sophia's shoulders. The walk to the car was filled with Sophia's excited chatter about the wedding plans. Abigail did her best to look interested, asking questions at the appropriate moments, while her mind whirled. How could she deal with this impossible situation? Once in the car, with Alexander driving and Sophia in the passenger seat, Abigail found herself staring out of the window at the familiar Massachusetts landscape. The tree-lined streets of Quincy brought back memories of a simpler time, when her biggest problem was deciding which college to attend. "So, Liv," Sophia turned in her seat, her eyes shining with excitement, "you won't believe it. Guess who's going to be the best man?" Abigail felt her stomach sink. She had a strong suspicion of where this was going. "Who?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Nathan, you remember him, don't you? Alex's best friend from college. He's absolutely amazing and single." Sophia cast a meaningful glance in the rearview mirror. "I thought you two would make a perfect couple for the entrance to the ceremony." Abigail forced a smile, feeling Alexander's gaze on her from the rearview mirror. "That's very kind of you, Soph, but I don't think it's a good idea. You know how I am about arranged meetings." "Oh, come on, it'll be fun. Besides, wouldn't it be great if my sister and my fiancé's best friend fell in love? It would be like a fairy tale." The irony of the situation didn't escape Abigail. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. "Let's see how things turn out, okay?" Abigail said, hoping to bring the matter to a close. The rest of the trip went by with Sophia detailing her plans for the dress, the flowers, and the venue. Abigail did her best to concentrate, but her thoughts kept returning to the man in the driver's seat and the secret that was growing inside her. When they finally arrived at Abigail and Sophia's parents' house, the familiarity of the place brought a mixture of comfort and apprehension. The two-story Victorian house, with its wraparound porch and manicured garden, was exactly as Abigail remembered it. Her parents, Eleanor and Robert Mason, were already waiting on the porch. Eleanor, with her grey hair elegantly tied up in a bun, came down the steps to hug Abigail. "My dear, how nice to have you back," Elena said, holding Abigail's face between her hands. Her eyes, always perceptive, seemed to notice something. "Are you all right? You look a little pale." "I'm fine, Mum. Just tired from the trip," Abigail assured her, praying that her mother wouldn't notice anything more than that. Robert approached, enveloping Abigail in a fatherly hug. "Welcome back, darling. We've missed you." As the family gathered in the living room, with Sophia dominating the conversation with her wedding plans, Abigail felt the weight of the secret she was carrying. She watched Alexander interacting with his parents, so at ease, as if he had always been part of the family. How could he act so naturally after what had happened between them? "Liv." Her mother's voice brought her back to the present. "Would you like some tea? You look like you could use one." "Yes, please," Abigail replied, grateful for the distraction. As Elena headed for the kitchen, Abigail followed, eager for a moment away from Alexander's prying eyes and disturbing presence. In the kitchen, away from the others, Elena turned to her eldest daughter with a worried look on her face. "Abigail, darling, are you sure everything's all right? You seem distant." Abigail hesitated. For a moment, she considered telling her mother everything, about Chicago, about Alexander, about the baby. But the words got stuck in her throat. How could she drop this bombshell in the middle of Sophia's wedding preparations? "I just have a lot on my mind with work," Abigail lied, hating herself for it. "But I'll be fine, I promise." Elena studied her daughter's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You know you can tell me anything, don't you?" "I know, Mum," Abigail replied, feeling a twinge of guilt. "Thanks." When they returned to the living room, cups of tea in hand, Abigail found Alexander staring at her with an intensity that made her shudder. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and she saw a shadow of emotion pass across his face. Regret. Longing. Before she could decipher it, he looked away, turning his attention to Sophia. Sitting there, surrounded by her family and the man she loved, the father of her unborn child, Abigail felt more alone than ever. She knew she couldn't keep this secret for long. The next few weeks would be a test of her strength and determination. As the night wore on and the plans for the wedding took shape, Abigail made a silent promise to herself and the baby she was carrying. She would find a way to navigate this emotional minefield. Somehow she would face the truth, no matter what the consequences. What Abigail didn't know was that her challenges were only just beginning, and that fate had plans that even she couldn't foresee. The next morning brought with it a sense of unreality for Abigail. She woke up in her old room, the sun's rays filtering through the familiar curtains, creating dancing patterns on the ceiling. For a moment, she almost believed that the last few months had just been a complex and disturbing dream. But the morning nausea that hit her as soon as she sat up in bed was a cruel reminder of reality. Abigail rushed into the adjoining bathroom, silently thankful that she had a room with a private bathroom. The last thing she needed was for someone to hear her feeling sick. After pulling herself together, Abigail went downstairs, the sounds of activity in the kitchen guiding her steps. She found her mother preparing breakfast, the aroma of pancakes filling the air. "Good morning, darling," Eleanor greeted with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well?" Abigail nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, thank you. Where is everyone?" "Your father went for a morning run, Sophia went to find the florist, and Alexander—" Eleanor paused, a slight frown crossing her face. "Well, he left early. He didn't mention where he was going." Abigail felt a twinge of curiosity and concern. Where would Alexander have gone so early? She pushed the thought away, reminding herself that it was no longer any of her business. "Liv, could you do me a favor?" Eleanor asked, interrupting her thoughts. "We need more eggs for the pancakes. Would you mind going to Mr. Thompson's grocery store? It's just across the street." "Sure, Mom," Abigail replied, grateful for the chance to get out and clear her mind. The fresh morning air was invigorating. Abigail took a deep breath, feeling a little more centered as she walked down the familiar sidewalk. Mr. Thompson's grocery store was an institution in Quincy, practically unchanged since her childhood. As she entered the store, the little bell above the door announced her arrival. Mr. Thompson, now with completely white hair, but still with the same warm smile, looked over his glasses. "Abigail Mason, how nice to see you back," he exclaimed. "I hear your sister is getting married. Congratulations to the family. Abigail smiled, the familiarity of the scene bringing a little comfort. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. It's good to be back. As she headed towards the dairy section, a familiar voice made her freeze in place. I can't do this, Nathan. It's too complicated. It was Alexander. Abigail hid behind a shelf, her heart racing. She knew she shouldn't listen, but she couldn't help herself. Alex, you need to tell the truth, Nathan's voice replied, low and urgent, before it's too late. And risk losing everything. I can't. There's too much at stake. Abigail felt her stomach churn, and it wasn't just the nausea of pregnancy. What were they talking about? What truth was Alexander hiding? Before she could hear any more, Mr. Thompson appeared at the end of the corridor. Did you find what you needed, dear? Abigail startled, almost knocking over a bottle of milk. Yes, she stammered, quickly picking up a carton of eggs. That's all. Thank you. She paid hastily and left the store, her mind spinning with what she had just heard. Alexander and Nathan disappeared before she could see them, but their words echoed in her head. Back at the house, Abigail handed the eggs to her mother. Mumbling something about needing to make some work calls, she took refuge in her room, closing the door and sitting on the edge of the bed. What was Alexander hiding? And how would this affect Sophia and her baby? Abigail ran her fingers through her hair in frustration. She knew she needed to tell him the truth about her pregnancy, but now, with this new information, everything seemed even more complicated. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. Liv, can I come in? It was Sophia. Abigail took a deep breath, composing herself. Of course, Sophia. Sophia entered, radiant as ever. Hey, little sister, I need your opinion on something important. For a moment, Abigail feared that Sophia had discovered something, but her sister's carefree smile reassured her. It's about the bridesmaid's dress, Sophia continued, taking a seat next to Abigail on the bed. I'm thinking of a lavender shade. What do you think? Abigail forced a smile. Sounds lovely, Soph. Sophia tilted her head, studying Abigail's face. Is everything okay? You look worried. For a moment, Abigail considered telling her everything, about the pregnancy, about Chicago, about the conversation she'd overheard, but looking at her sister's hopeful face, she couldn't. Not yet. I'm fine, Abigail lied, hating herself for it. Just a bit tired. You know how exhausting these trips can be. Sophia didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. Well, don't push yourself too hard, okay? I want my sister and godmother in top shape for the big day. When Sophia left, Abigail felt even more alone and confused. She knew she needed to make a decision, and fast. But with each new revelation, the way forward seemed more and more nebulous. That afternoon, as the family gathered for lunch in the garden, Abigail watched Alexander interacting with everyone. He was charming, attentive, the perfect son-in-law. But now, knowing that he was hiding something, Abigail saw tiny cracks in his facade, a worried look here, a hesitation there. When their gazes met across the table, Abigail saw something in his eyes. Guilt. Fear. That made her shudder. She looked away, focusing on her untouched plate. Liv, you've barely touched your food, her mother commented, concerned. Are you feeling all right? All eyes turned to her, including Alexander's. Abigail felt the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. I just don't have much of an appetite, she mumbled. That's not like you, her father observed. Are you sure you're not ill? Abigail felt panic rising. She wasn't ready for this conversation. Not here, not now. But the words escaped before she could contain them. Actually, I need to tell you all something. The silence that followed was deafening. Abigail felt Alexander's intense gaze on her, a mixture of fear and something else she couldn't decipher. She took a deep breath, preparing to change the course of their lives forever. But before she could continue, Sophia's phone rang, breaking the moment. Oh, it's the florist, Sophia exclaimed, getting up. I need to take this. It's about the arrangements. Sorry. As Sophia stepped away to take the call, the tension at the table was palpable. Abigail felt her parents' questioning gaze and Alexander's intense stare. What did you want to tell us, dear? Elena asked softly. Abigail hesitated. The moment had passed. Looking at her family's worried faces and Alexander's tense countenance, she realized that she couldn't do this. Not now. Not like this. I just wanted to say that I'm thinking of moving back to Quincy, she improvised. I miss home. The tension at the table visibly eased. Her parents smiled, clearly relieved and happy with the news, but Alexander's gaze remained fixed on her, a mixture of relief and disappointment. As the conversation at the table resumed its normal course, Abigail felt the weight of her decision. She had postponed the inevitable, but how long could she keep this secret? As the afternoon progressed, Abigail found herself increasingly isolated in her thoughts. She knew she needed a plan, a way to navigate this emotional minefield without destroying her sister's happiness or her family's unity. But with each passing hour, with each furtive glance exchanged with Alexander, with each radiant smile from Sophia, Abigail felt she was sinking deeper and deeper into a pit of secrets and lies. The truth, she realized, would have to come out at some point, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The week that followed was a whirlwind of wedding-related activity. Abigail found herself dragged from one task to another, from trying on bridesmaids' dresses to choosing floral arrangements. She did her best to keep busy, hoping that the hustle and bustle would prevent her from thinking too much about her situation. One particularly hectic afternoon, Abigail found herself in downtown Quincy, helping Sophia pick out the wedding invitations. The elegant stationery store was full of paper samples and elaborate designs. "What do you think of this one, Liv?" Sophia asked, holding up a cream-colored invitation with gold details. Abigail forced a smile, trying to concentrate. "It's nice, Soph. It suits you." Sophia frowned, studying her sister's face. "Okay, enough. What's going on with you?" "What are you talking about?" Abigail tried to deflect, pretending to examine another invitation. "Don't play dumb. You've been distant, distracted. You barely have a say in the wedding. That's not your normal, Liv. You've always had an opinion on everything." Abigail felt a lump form in her throat. Her sister knew her too well to be fooled for long. "I just have a lot on my mind," she muttered, avoiding Sophia's gaze. Sophia put the invitation aside and took Abigail's hands. "Is it because of a man? Did something happen in Chicago that you're not telling me about?" Sophia's worried look almost broke Abigail's resolve. For a moment, she considered telling her everything right there in the little stationery store in the heart of Quincy. But before she could answer, the store door opened and Alexander walked in, followed by Nathan. "Oh, you're here!" Sophia exclaimed, her face lighting up at the sight of her fiancé. "Have you come to help us with the invitations?" Alexander smiled, but his eyes fixed on Abigail for a brief moment. "Actually, I came to pick you up for lunch. Remember, we have that appointment with the wedding planner." Sophia slapped her forehead. "Oh dear, I'd completely forgotten. Liv, would you mind staying here? I promise I won't be long." Abigail nodded mechanically, her stomach churning at the thought of being alone with Nathan. She still couldn't forget the conversation she had overheard between him and Alexander in the grocery store. As Sophia and Alexander left, Nathan remained, a hesitant smile on his face. "So," he began, approaching Abigail, "how are you coping with all this wedding madness?" Abigail shrugged, pretending to examine another set of invitations. "Everything's fine. Sophia seems happy." Nathan watched her for a moment, as if trying to decipher something. "You know," he said slowly, "sometimes things aren't exactly as they seem." Abigail froze, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Abigail, I know we don't know each other well, but I feel like I need to tell you something." At that moment, a wave of nausea hit Abigail. She felt the blood drain from her face, her vision blurring at the edges. I need air," she muttered, staggering towards the door. Nathan followed her, concern evident on his face. "Abigail, are you all right?" As soon as they left the store, Abigail leaned against the wall of the building, taking a deep breath. The fresh air helped a little, but the dizziness persisted. "Maybe we should sit down," Nathan suggested, gently guiding her to a nearby bench. Sitting down, Abigail closed her eyes, trying to control the nausea. When she opened them again, she found Nathan looking at her with a mixture of concern and understanding. "How long has it been?" he asked softly. Abigail blinked, confused. "What?" "The pregnancy," Nathan replied, his voice low and gentle. "How long have you known?" Shock ran through Abigail's body. How had he known? She hadn't told anyone, not even her family. How did you—" she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Nathan smiled sadly. "My sister went through something similar last year. I recognize the signs." He paused, studying Abigail's face. "It's Alexander's, isn't it?" Abigail felt the tears she had been holding back for days finally overflow. She nodded silently, unable to find words. Nathan sighed deeply, running his hand over his face. "I knew something was wrong. Alex has been different since he came back from Chicago." You knew about us?" Abigail asked, her voice trembling. Nathan shook his head. "Not exactly. But I've known Alex for years. I realized that something had changed, and when I saw you two together here in Quincy, well, some things started to make sense." Abigail wiped away her tears, feeling simultaneously relieved to finally share her secret and terrified of the implications. "What do I do, Nathan?" she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice palpable. Nathan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You need to tell him, Abigail, and your family. I know it seems impossible now, but keeping this secret will only hurt more people in the long run." Abigail nodded slowly, knowing that Nathan was right, but the thought of facing Alexander, of potentially destroying Sophia's happiness, was almost unbearable. "What if," she began hesitantly, "what if I just left? I went back to Chicago and live with that weight forever?" Nathan interrupted gently. "Abigail, you deserve more than that. Your baby deserves more than that." Nathan's words hit Abigail like a punch in the stomach. Your baby. It was the first time someone had referred to her pregnancy in such a concrete, real way. At that moment, sitting on a bench in downtown Quincy with the best friend of the man she loved, the man who was about to marry her sister, Abigail felt a resolution forming inside her. "You're right," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I need to tell the truth." "To everyone," Nathan smiled, squeezing her shoulder lightly. "It's the right thing to do, and hey, no matter what happens, you're not alone in this, okay?" Abigail nodded, grateful for the unexpected source of support. As they got up from the bench, she saw Sophia and Alexander returning, laughing at something one of them had said. "It's time," Nathan muttered. Abigail took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was to come. She knew that the next few hours would change the course of their lives forever, but for the first time in weeks, she felt ready to face the truth, no matter what the consequences. With determined steps, Abigail walked towards her sister and Alexander, Nathan right behind her. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back. The sound of Abigail's footsteps echoed in her ears as she approached Sophia and Alexander. Her heart was beating so loudly that she was sure everyone around her could hear it. A few meters from the couple, however, she hesitated. "Liv," Sophia asked, noticing her sister's tense expression, "is everything all right?" Alexander, noticing Abigail and Nathan approaching, frowned slightly. His eyes moved quickly between the two of them, a shadow of concern crossing his face. Abigail opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she do this here in the middle of the street, with people passing by? This was neither the place nor the time. She began, her voice breaking. "I think we need to talk. All of us." Sophia looked confusedly from Abigail to Nathan, and then to Alexander. "What are you talking about, Liv? Did something happen?" Alexander stepped forward, his posture tense. "Maybe we should go somewhere more private," he suggested, his voice low and controlled. Nathan nodded in agreement. "How about the park? It's quiet at this hour." The small group headed in silence for Marymount Park, not far away. The tension was palpable, each lost in their own thoughts and worries. When they reached a secluded spot in the park, under the shade of a large oak tree, Abigail finally turned to face the others. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she intertwined them to try and calm herself. "Sophia," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, there's something I need to tell you." Sophia approached her sister, concern evident in her eyes. "Liv, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Abigail took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she could. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia blinked several times, as if trying to process the information. Alexander, on the other hand, paled visibly. "Pregnant?" Sophia repeated, a smile beginning to form on her lips. "But that's wonderful, Liv. Why did you seem so worried about telling us? Who's the father? Is it someone from Chicago?" Abigail felt tears begin to form in her eyes. This was the hardest part. "The father?" She hesitated, her gaze moving involuntarily to Alexander. Sophia followed her sister's gaze, understanding slowly forming on her face. "No," she muttered, taking a step back. "It can't be—" Alexander finally found his voice. "Sophia, I can explain." But Sophia wasn't listening. Her eyes moved frantically between Abigail and Alexander, disbelief and pain evident on every line of her face. "Both of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How? When?" "It was in Chicago," Abigail said quickly, the words now coming out in a torrent. "Before he met you, Soph, we met, we spent some time together, but then he disappeared. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was your fiancé until I got here." Sophia staggered backwards, as if she had taken a physical blow. Nathan quickly moved to support her, preventing her from falling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophia asked, tears now running freely down her face. "Why didn't any of you tell me?" Alexander took a step towards Sophia, but she stepped back. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his voice breaking. "But I was afraid of losing you." Abigail felt her heart break as she saw the pain on her sister's face. "Soph, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could handle it on my own." Sophia pulled away from Nathan, furiously wiping the tears from her face. "Deal with it alone. Liv, this isn't something you just deal with. It's a baby. My fiancé's baby." "Ex-fiancé," Nathan muttered, but everyone heard. Alexander turned to Sophia, his eyes pleading. "Sophia, please, can we talk about this? I love you, you know that." But Sophia was already shaking her head. "Love? You call that love? Lying to me, getting my sister pregnant? No, Alexander, that's not love." She turned to Abigail, her eyes full of hurt and betrayal. "And you, my own sister, how could you?" Abigail felt the tears run down her face. "Soph, I swear, I didn't know. By the time I found out, it was too late." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Too late? Liv, you've had weeks to tell me the truth, to stop it getting this far." "I know," Abigail sobbed. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was scared, confused." But Sophia was already walking away. I need to be alone. Don't follow me, any of you." With that, she turned and ran, leaving the other three standing under the oak tree, the weight of her revelations hanging heavily over them. Alexander made a move to follow her, but Nathan stopped him with a firm hand on his shoulder. "Let her go, Alex. She needs space now." Abigail sank to the floor, her legs finally giving way under the weight of the situation. She hugged her knees, sobbing openly now. Alexander knelt beside her, hesitant. "Liv, I'm so sorry. For everything." She looked up at him through her tears, seeing the guilt and regret in his eyes. "What are we going to do now, Alex?" He shook his head, looking lost. "I don't know, but we'll find out together, okay? You're not alone in this." Nathan watched the scene with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "You two need to talk," he said softly. "There's a lot to be decided. But first, I think we all need some time to process this." Abigail nodded, wiping away her tears. She knew Nathan was right. There was a lot to be discussed, a lot of decisions to be made. But at that moment, under the oak tree in Merrymount Park, With the distant sound of Sophia's sobs echoing in her ears, all she could do was breathe and try to prepare herself for what came next. The truth had finally come out, and now they would have to deal with the consequences. The future, which had once seemed so certain and definite, was now hazy and uncertain. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same. The hours following the revelation in the park passed like a blur for Abigail. She could barely remember how she got home, gently guided by Nathan, while Alexander went off in search of Sophia. The look of shock and disappointment on her parents' faces when she finally plucked up the courage to tell them the truth would remain etched in her memory forever. Now sitting on the veranda of her childhood home, Abigail watched the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The beauty of the moment contrasted drastically with the whirlwind of emotions inside her. The creak of the front door brought her out of her thoughts. Her mother, Elena, stepped out onto the porch, 2 steaming cups of tea in her hands. "I thought you might like this," Elena said softly, offering Abigail a cup. Abigail accepted the tea with a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Mum." Elena sat down next to her daughter, and for a few moments they were both silent, watching the twilight. "Sophia's not back yet?" Abigail finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. Elena shook her head. "No, Alexander called a little while ago. He found her at a friend's house. She needs some time." Abigail felt the tears start to form again. "I've ruined everything, haven't I? I destroyed my own sister's happiness." Elena sighed deeply, putting an arm around Abigail's shoulders. "Oh, darling, life is rarely so simple. Yes, mistakes were made, but it's not all your fault." "But if I'd told you before," Abigail began, but her mother gently interrupted her. "What if Alexander had been honest from the start? What if fate hadn't put you in this impossible situation?" Elena shook her head. "We can't change the past, Liv. We can only decide how to deal with the present and the future." Abigail nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. How is Dad coping with all this?" A small, sad smile appeared on Elena's lips. "You know your father. He's processing. Give him time. He loves you and Sophia more than anything in this world. That won't change." They were silent for a few more moments, the sky gradually darkening around them. "What about the baby?" Elena asked softly, her hand unconsciously moving to Abigail's still flat belly. Abigail placed her hand over her mother's, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. I'm going to keep him. No matter what happens to Alexander, to Sophia, this child is innocent in all of this." Elena squeezed Abigail's hand. "And you won't be alone. No matter what happens, you'll have our support, always." The tears Abigail had been holding back finally overflowed. She leaned towards her mother, who wrapped her in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mom," Abigail sobbed. "I don't know what I'd do without you." As mother and daughter embraced on the balcony, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both look up. Alexander was standing at the bottom of the balcony steps, looking exhausted and haggard. Abigail straightened up, wiping away her tears. "Alex, where's Sophia?" Alexander climbed the steps slowly, as if each movement was painful. "She's staying at her friend's house for the time being. She needs space." Eleanor stood up, looking from Abigail to Alexander. "I think you two need to talk. I'll be inside if you need me." As soon as Elena entered, Alexander sat down in the chair she had vacated. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, the silence heavy between them. "How is she?" Abigail finally asked, her voice almost inaudible. Alexander ran a hand over his face, looking years older than he was, confused, furious, everything you can imagine. Abigail nodded, feeling the weight of guilt on her shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Alex, for everything." He looked at her, his eyes full of emotion. "No, Liv. I'm the one who's sorry. I should have been honest from the start. With Sophia, with you, with everyone." "What do we do now?" Abigail asked, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Alexander followed the movement with his eyes, a mixture of fear and wonder in his gaze. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know that I want to be part of this baby's life. If you let me." Abigail felt a wave of relief wash over her. Despite everything, knowing that she wouldn't be completely alone on this journey was comforting. "And Sophia?" she asked, dreading the answer. Alexander shook his head sadly. "She's made it very clear that the engagement is over. I can't blame her. I betrayed her trust in every possible way." Abigail felt the tears coming back. "I never meant for this to happen, Alex. I never wanted to hurt my sister." "I know," he said softly. "None of us did. But here we are." They were silent for a long moment, the weight of their decisions and their consequences hanging over them. "We'll figure this out together," Alexander finally said, reaching out to take Abigail's hand, step by step. "It won't be easy, but we're in this together now." Abigail nodded, squeezing his hand. As the last ray of sunshine disappeared over the horizon, she felt a small spark of hope ignite in her chest. The road ahead would be difficult, full of challenges and broken hearts to heal, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely lost. The future was uncertain, but at least now she wouldn't have to face it alone. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and changes for everyone involved. Abigail, now almost 4 months pregnant, was beginning to show a small curve in her belly, a constant reminder of the consequences of her actions. On a sunny Saturday morning, Abigail found herself in the back garden of her parents' house, tending to the flowers her mother loved so much. The manual labor helped her clear her mind and, for a few moments, forget the tension that still hung over the family. "Be careful not to overexert yourself," a familiar voice sounded behind her. Abigail turned to see Nathan approaching, carrying a tray of lemonade and cookies. Over the last few weeks, he had become a surprising support to both her and Sophia. "Thanks," Abigail smiled, taking off her gardening gloves and accepting the glass he offered. "How's Sophia?" Nathan sighed, taking a seat on the garden bench. "She's coping with everything, day after day. I think she's finally agreed to talk to you." Abigail's heart leapt. Since the revelation, Sophia had refused to speak to her or Alexander, communicating only through her parents or Nathan. "Did she say that?" Abigail asked, hope evident in her voice. Nathan nodded. "She mentioned that she might be ready for a coffee. Nothing too long or intense, but it's a start." Abigail felt tears forming in her eyes. "It's already more than I expected. Thank you for being there for her, Nathan. I know it can't be easy, considering your friendship with Alex." "It hasn't been easy for anyone," Nathan admitted, "but sometimes the most difficult situations bring out the best in people. Sophia is stronger than we all thought." They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the last few weeks. The sound of the front doorbell echoed through the garden. "That must be Alex," Nathan commented, getting up. "He mentioned he'd be by to discuss some arrangements." Abigail nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Since the revelation, she and Alexander had had several difficult conversations about the future, the baby, and what it all meant for them. Moments later, Alexander appeared in the garden, looking tired but determined. He greeted Nathan with a quick handshake before turning to Abigail. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his eyes automatically moving to Abigail's slightly protruding belly. "Fine," she replied softly. "The morning sickness finally seems to be subsiding." Nathan looked between the two of them, sensing the tension in the air. "I'll let you two talk," he said, picking up the tray. "I'll be inside if you need anything." As soon as Nathan left, Alexander sat down next to Abigail on the bench. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze. "I've been thinking a lot," Alexander began, his voice low and serious. "About us, about the baby, about everything." Abigail felt her heart racing. Alexander turned to face her, his eyes full of emotion. "I want to be a part of it, Liv. Completely. Not just as a weekend dad or a name on a pension check. I want to be there every step of the way." Abigail felt a wave of relief and apprehension wash through her. "Alex, I appreciate that. More than you can imagine. But what about Sophia, her life here in Quincy?" Alexander sighed deeply. "Sophia has made it very clear that there is no future for us as a couple, and as for Quincy, well, maybe it's time for a new beginning. For all of us." Abigail stared at him in surprise. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we should consider a fresh start, away from here, where we can build something new without the constant weight of the past haunting us." The idea was both frightening and tempting, leaving Quincy, her family, everything she knew, but also the chance of a fresh start, away from judgmental stares and painful memories. "I don't know, Alex," Abigail said hesitantly. "It's a huge decision, and my family—" "Think about it," Alexander said gently, placing his hand on hers. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just consider the possibilities." Before Abigail could reply, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. They both looked up to see Sophia standing at the entrance to the garden, her eyes moving between them, a mixture of pain and resignation on her face. "Soph," Abigail whispered, standing up quickly. Sophia held up a hand, stopping Abigail from approaching. "No," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I came to say that I'm ready to talk, but not now, not with the two of you together." Alexander stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "I should go," he muttered. Sophia nodded stiffly, avoiding looking directly at him. As Alexander passed her to leave, Sophia spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "Take care of her. And the baby." Alexander paused for a moment, clearly surprised by the statement. He glanced back at Abigail, then at Sophia, before nodding solemnly and leaving. The two sisters stood there, the air heavy with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "Tomorrow, at the cafe around the corner, at 10. With that, she turned and left, leaving Abigail alone in the garden, her heart torn between the hope of reconciliation with her sister and the frightening and exciting prospect of a new beginning with Alexander. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Abigail found herself at a crossroads. The future, which had once seemed so clear and defined, was now full of possibilities and uncertainties. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. Tomorrow would bring a chance of healing, of understanding, and, perhaps, the start of a new chapter in her life. With a hand on her belly, Abigail took a deep breath, preparing herself for whatever tomorrow would bring. One thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same, but maybe, just maybe, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the small coffee shop on the corner, mingling with the smell of fresh bread and the soft buzz of morning conversations. Abigail arrived a few minutes before 10, her heart beating hard against her chest. She chose a discreet table in the corner, away from the windows, where she could see the door. At 10 o'clock sharp, Sophia entered. Her eyes roamed the place until she found Abigail. For a brief moment, Abigail saw hesitation on her sister's face, but Sophia took a deep breath and walked towards her. "Hi," Sophia said softly, taking a seat. "Hi," Abigail replied, her voice almost a whisper. "Thanks for coming." A waitress approached, momentarily breaking the tension. They both ordered coffee, Abigail opting for a decaffeinated version. When they were alone again, silence hung between them. Finally, Sophia spoke. How are you feeling?" Abigail instinctively put her hand on her belly. "Fine. The nausea has subsided. The doctor says everything's normal." Sophia nodded, her eyes fixed on the cup in front of her. "Good." Another pause, the silence laden with unspoken words. "So far, Abigail began, but Sophia interrupted her. "Why didn't you tell me before?" The question came out abruptly, full of pain and confusion. Abigail felt tears forming. "I was afraid of hurting you, of losing you. I thought I could handle everything on my own." Sophia finally looked at her, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "But I'm your sister, Liv, your best friend. How could you keep something like that?" "I know," Abigail sobbed. "I know, and I regret it every day. I never wanted things to come to this." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to control herself. "Do you love him?" The question took Abigail by surprise. She hesitated, pondering. I don't know. It all happened so fast, and now with the baby. It's complicated." Sophia nodded slowly. Does he want to be part of the baby's life? Yes, Abigail replied. In fact, he suggested we start again, away from here. Sophia's eyes widened. You're leaving? Abigail shook her head quickly. No, I don't know. It's just an idea. I haven't decided anything. Silence fell between them again, each lost in their own thoughts. You know, Sophia finally spoke, her voice softer. When we were children, I always dreamed that one day we would have children at the same time, that our children would grow up together, just like us. Abigail felt her heart squeeze. Soph? No, let me finish. Sophia interrupted her gently. I'm hurt. Liv, deeply hurt. And it's going to take time for me to get over it completely. But, she paused, taking a deep breath. But you're my sister. And this baby. This baby is my nephew or niece. I can't just ignore that. Abigail felt the tears flow freely down her face. What are you saying? Sophia reached out, hesitantly, and placed her hand over Abigail's. I'm saying that, as hard as it is, I want to try. I want to be part of this baby's life. And I want my sister back. Abigail sobbed, squeezing Sophia's hand. I miss you so much, Soph. So much. The two sisters looked at each other. Years of love, friendship, and now pain reflected in their gazes. It will take time, Sophia said softly. It won't be easy. But we're family. And family faces things together. At that moment, something changed between them. It wasn't total forgiveness or forgetting what had happened, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to heal. When they left the cafe an hour later, the sun was shining brightly, as if reflecting the small light of hope that had been kindled between them. Abigail arrived home, emotionally exhausted, but with one less weight on her shoulders. She found Alexander waiting on the balcony, anxiety evident on his face. How was it? He asked as soon as he saw her. Abigail smiled slightly. It was a start. She sat down next to him, telling him about her conversation with Sophia. When she had finished, Alexander took her hand. What about what we talked about yesterday, about starting over somewhere else? Abigail looked at the familiar street, at the house where she grew up, at the memories that every corner held. Then she looked at Alexander, at the uncertain but full of possibilities future he represented. I think, she said slowly, that sometimes in order to really start again, we need to stay right where we are. Alexander looked at her, surprised. You want to stay? Abigail nodded. I want to face it, rebuild the relationships, heal the wounds. I want our son to grow up knowing his family, every part of it. It won't be easy, but it's worth a try, Alexander added, a small smile forming on his lips. At that moment, sitting on the balcony of the house that had seen so many stories unfold, Abigail felt a peace she hadn't experienced for months. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges and difficult times, but now she knew she wouldn't face any of it alone. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Abigail placed her hand on her belly, feeling the slight movement of the baby inside her. It was the end of a chapter, yes, but also the beginning of something new, something beautiful and unexpected. And so, with the warmth of Alexander's hand in hers and the promise of a new day ahead, Abigail finally allowed herself to look to the future with hope. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. And that, she realized, was more than enough.